Hello everybody and welcome to this session with Rowena Hennigan. Rowena is a remote work skills expert. Remote work has enabled her to live in 13 countries, travel extensively and find work-life balance. She relishes in being an advocate and a leader on the education and skills needed for effective remote work practices. Hello Rowena, welcome to the session.
Hi, thank you for the lovely introduction, Lotte. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and get going into the presentation. So I'll be presenting for about 15-20 minutes and we can do a couple of questions at the end. So, so this session is on the 360-degree or the full picture skills that I believe are needed for a remote worker. And why have I chosen this topic today is because so much focus is given on the operational and technical skills that may be needed in the remote workspace and in its operations. But I believe that there's a bigger picture that we need to all be aware of. So I'm Rowena Hennigan, also known as Row Remote. I've been working remotely since 2007. I'm joining you today from Zaragoza in Spain, but I'm originally from Ireland. And as Lotte introduced me, I have relished in remote working for many years. It's enabled me to travel, live a totally different lifestyle, and I'm a massive advocate for the whole approach and space. And I believe I'm one of the few people that concentrates on remote work, best practice education and skills in the world. So it's a privilege to be here today. And let's see how we can try to start to understand that full 360-degree view together. So it's not all coding, it's not all technical skills, it's not all operational skills. We need to think about the big picture of a remote worker. And although we're coming out of COVID, originally, and lots of us have been forced to remote work in this situation, originally many remote workers were seen as those anorak type people in the corner that might have been coding or concentrating on their work. But as time has gone on, it's become very aware, and not just also and very apparent in remote work, in many knowledge working type roles and in these industries, that the skills around behavioral, performance skills and knowledge, rather than technical skills and competencies are just as important. So we need to start by understanding these range of skills, that it's wider than just our ability to code, be technical, or our core business skills. We need to appreciate how they fit into remote work and its overall operations. And we need to get a grasp as well a little bit of the different terms. And there's lots of terms out there. Soft skills, power skills, behavioral, interpersonal. You don't need to understand them all completely. You need to start to look as an individual remote worker or a potential remote worker at this bigger picture and look for the hints in terms of these other skills and competencies. I like the term power skills other than soft skills. And here's my lovely tactile sheep's coat here. The point is that if you can be the best at something in the world, the best scientist, the best coder, whatever it may be in terms of your proficiency, but if you can't communicate it, if you can't work in a team, if you can't present yourself, if you can't creatively look at that skill and put it in place in either business or other in other ways in life, often then we're unable to get that value across. I've heard the term earlier today, soft skills for hard cash, which I liked as well, using soft skills, but certainly with power skills, which I like to call them, that comes from Josh Burston. He's an author who coined that. I believe that we need to start looking at these more, the full view, these other skills that support our technical competencies. The World Economic Forum, their Future Jobs report, already called out some of these, the top 10 skills that would be relevant in 2020. This was in 2019. And if you look on the left-hand side here, whatever about the comparison to 2015, look how high creativity is. Look how high critical thinking is. Look how high complex problem solving is on the list. And also emotional intelligence, which is really important, is called out there. So the technical skills are not so much there, but within problem solving, for example, that could be part of your technical competency as well. And you could be technical and also be quite creative. But it's also good to keep looking in these other research areas and reports for other things like this that have been called out that are more than these technical skills. Persuasion, interesting one to be up there near the top of the list, and collaboration when we talk about remote working. Really important. Again, are you able to meet someone in the middle on a collaboration on a project? How good are you at compromising? How good are you at persuading and getting across your point? So time management's on there as well. We'll come back to that in a minute. This is from LinkedIn Learning, and I will supply a list of all these resources for you to get a better understanding of some of this research and these different skills. Josh Bershin as well, he mapped out, when he was talking about the power skills, he mapped out some of these behavioral skills. And we see the core technical skills listed here in the grey, and the blue ones, which cover off, again, these power skills: time management, flexibility, adaptability in terms of change, being able to communicate, working effectively, really linked to collaboration, capacity for innovation and creativity, and ethics and integrity. So have you stopped to think about these? How are your communication skills? Could you do what we're doing today, for example? So a little bit of self-reflection is needed in terms of where you are with these skills. And what I'm going to try and do is give you the best overall framework for mapping your potential skills to also what's out there on the job market. So here's a quick overview of some of those skills. Conscientiousness, communication, that attention to detail, in terms of and conscientiousness obviously is very linked as well to problem solving and innovation, because if you see a challenge in something you're working in, a part that you don't understand, you conscientiously maybe want to answer that or deal with it. The time management, whole area in its own right at the moment, coming out of COVID, where people have been juggling competing priorities, competing challenges in terms of work life, being on top of each other, balancing diaries and plans. But again, how are you at that? How do you work? Do you know how you work in terms of time management? What I'm hoping to do here is also, when I go through some of these, even if you make a mental note, or even better, pick up a pen and paper and write it down in a trusty notebook. The, the brain is a fascinating thing. I mean, it's something, especially when it comes to our emotional intelligence and these skills, where it really, once the seed has been planted, once, for example, I suggest, have you got a potential gap in your time management skills? Is it something that you need to work on, that I would suggest that you might notice going forward once that little seed has been planted in there? How is your emotional adjustment to change? How are you when things are in turmoil? How are you when you're faced with challenges? What's your motivation like? What are your drivers? What motivates you? And all of these obviously overlap in some way. But the point is, have you thought about these things in terms of your approach to looking for remote work? How's your curiosity? Are you really curious? Where does your curiosity stop and start? And that's something, again, that is often looked for in terms of conscientiousness and curiosity in remote roles. And I'll come on to that a little bit more in a minute. So the point of that sample of those different behavioral and power skills is for you to spend a minute or two reflecting. Do you really know your own ingredients? What makes you up? Because maybe you've been focusing only on those technical and operational skills. Have you a better profile? Could you start to map and paint that picture of yourself? Could you start to plan out an individual summary, listing out these different key things within these skills? Would you mention these different things, the communication skills, the conscientiousness, the being motivated? Would you also have an analysis in terms of your adjustment and emotional resilience in terms of stress? Are you curious? Are you always learning? So sometimes just even getting those down on paper helps you to assess them and to start to notice them. There's also some other research I'm going to point you to, because lots of the research I've mentioned already is from analysing or predicting, based on evidence-based research, what companies will be needing in the future of work, what skills they'll be looking for. But this particular research from Ian McRae and Roberta Sawatsky is actually based on remote workers, and the research was conducted in remote workers. So I've got some reference points for you there in terms of the competencies for remote workers. And to summarize that in this time, the personality profile of remote workers shows that they are excellent communicators, highly conscientious, resilient to stress, and keen to learn. So I'm picking up on some of those other skills that have already been highlighted: communication, conscientiousness, with that curiosity, resilient and adaptable to stress, and that always learning, always learning. And I don't know if you know any problem solvers, really good problem solvers, and I can think of some in my world. Sometimes I like to think of myself when I'm in a certain zone to be quite good at problem solving. But problem solvers that I know, they are always learning. It's interesting. So you start, maybe, even if you can't do total analysis on yourself or reflection, you can start to look around and notice these traits in other people. This conscientiousness than the general population that this research highlighted is significantly higher. The workers' motivation, discipline, and capacity for longer term planning. So they have that higher level in these existing remote worker roles. And again, it's just something to be aware of as you aspire to move into this space. So put this in context. Let's look at the culture and operations of remote companies. We probably know from some of the other talks that there is trust and transparency inherent. We often talk about in remote operations that this fantastic level of communication mastery, explicit communications, extensive documentation. So let's hold on that one for a section. And I picked the picture of the scaffolding on the structure on purpose, because one of the key things in remote companies, remote first, successful ones, is that they are excellent. They excel at documentation. And within that company, it's the workers, the individual workers, who are very good at documenting and reflecting on processes, on operational descriptions, on recording, whatever it needs to explain a process. And they also do that within their intercommunications. Important one to consider, and hold on for a couple of minutes. Also within these remote companies, we've got autonomy, because if you're highly conscientious, if you're a problem solver, if you're quite adaptable, you're often going to have a role that's autonomous within these companies. You're used to feedback loops. You're used to constantly improving. Within these remote companies, like the big companies that are automatic, GitHub, GitLab, they are based on open source approaches in their technology. They foster that continual improvement, curiosity, and problem solving. So that gives you a little idea about how you could maybe map these back to the context of the available roles in these companies. So you could take a role and look at the description as part of your research, and maybe now start to notice within there, what are these power skills? What are these 360 skills that are listed and that are in this job role? And the good news is, well, that I believe that it can be nurture more or less versus nature, that you can, and there's debates about this, but you're here today, you're listening to these talks, you're curious, you're planning a definite route to looking for remote work. So I believe that you can nurture a lot of these skills once you've noticed the gaps. But where do you need to start? Now, if we take a second to look back at what I mentioned about the documentation, the recording, the writing that happens so regularly in remote first organizations, it's all part of this logging culture, this self-reflection, this documentation. Very, very journaling is very common, but also just writing up their experiences. And as you research remote companies and look at potential targets for employment, you should notice this in their communications, in their openness, their tone, and what's available freely online. So you'll notice that, but are you doing it for yourself? Have you come back into yourself and started reflecting and logging on what you want to achieve and where you want to go? Where's your vision? Have you started considering some of these power skills, some of these behavioral skills? Make some notes. Begin to notice maybe the gaps, the opportunities, and what you could be working on. And then maybe start to take some decisive action in terms of looking at where you could brush up on certain things, whether it's from joining a Toastmasters club, where a lot of them are virtual at the moment, to practice your public speaking, whether it's simply beginning to write more, whether it's looking at your time management and doing some reading on that and finding out what would be best practice there, following up on some of my resources so you can read up on some of these skills and understand them better. Start to notice them in your network. Start to notice them in people you already work with that you admire. But try and turn those observations and reflections into actions so that you can start along a learning path. So the action is really important in here, and I am trying to encourage you specifically to do that, because it's only when you start to work on them that you will have the valid examples during interview process when you go and you get to that stage during application and interview process for remote jobs. So moving to action is learning by doing, and it also will really supplement your actual job application process. And why have I got this slide? Well, you're not alone. There's lots of other people probably who aspire to the same. Maybe you've got people you can lean on in your network. So if you go to them with a structured approach, so I've got my two little fishies here because they're working together and swimming around in the coral, and the idea is that you could find a buddy on this journey with you to help you work on those skills. And doing that in tandem, even informally with someone or with a coach, whatever you choose, is a really good idea so you get that support. You need to build your toolkit in this area and your own understanding of your self-profile within that. What is the picture? Whether there are rooms for improvement or not, know yourself if you can within that power skills profile. At least have a one-pager where you've started to map out through your journaling, through your observations, through a period of time. And that is the opportunity then to take those learnings and apply them effectively to any job applications going forward and giving yourself a better chance in the job arena. That's more or less it for now, and I was hoping that there might be a couple of questions that we could get on to, hopefully.
All right, thank you very much. Um, yeah, so I was wondering, when you started to work remotely, what was for you the biggest hurdle to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
Understanding or appreciating when you're working remotely that everyone has, lots of people that you work with have different preferences in how they communicate and how they work operationally. And you might have even noticed this already if you've been working a little bit remotely during COVID, that there would be people who want to go on a video call, people who are hesitant, people who still rely on email, people who are good on instant messaging. And that actually awareness around those different methods of communication was one of the first things I noticed, and something that, because I work freelance on different projects, I almost had to get into my operational rhythm, where when I set up with someone, I try on a project, I try and be clear on those communication norms. You don't call them communication norms, that's a sort of technical term for it, but even our exchanges, our working together, we knew we were doing some things on email or whatever it may be, but in more complex teams you would set those up. So for people joining in this new, that would be one of the biggest tips I could give people, that you will find, especially on these bigger teams, there's different modes, and especially if people are brought in from different parts, if the team is brought together. So a really good exercise to do on an early get together is have a 5 or 10 minute conversation on those norms for communication, and just even agree we will have calls on video on Zoom, we will do instant messaging on Slack. It sounds really obvious, but it's actually not. And what will come out of that, if you have a 5 or 6 pointer mini charter, is that any potential issues will obviously come out quite quickly. Because if you set those standards and you find that there is someone who really doesn't like chat for some reason, or doesn't use it, or doesn't communicate well on it, you can at least broach it in the next meeting and look at how you work around that. So that would be something I noticed and that I've learned over the years.
Okay, great. So besides of all the research you already showed and that you will give also in a separate document, are there any books or blogs or podcasts that you can recommend people if they want to find out more about these power skills?
Definitely. So if you go onto my, so I'm rowremote.com. It's on every slide. I've got some blogs there. Um, I have actually have a blog post on books that I'm just working on. But John O'Dinn, who is another Irish author based in the USA, he an expert. He has a fabulous, really easy to read book called Distributed Teams. The art and practice of working remotely while your teams are separated, and that's a really easy one to read. Lisette Sutherland as well has a book. She would be a well-known author. So they would be the two main ones I would point you to. But my blog posts, I do have a couple of other summary blog posts in there that recommend podcasts, readings, articles. And yeah, like just educate yourself in that area. Start reading. Every Also want to say there is a lot of writing out there, but there's different tones of the writing. Some of it is aimed at software, some of it is aimed at established organizations. So look at the reviews and just pick what matches your needs better when you're picking the books, because there are quite a few books out there. But get really good feedback, and I know that John O'Dinn's is considered one of the easiest to pick up and read.
Okay, great. So if people want to talk a little bit further with you about these power skills or get some more information, besides of your website, where else can they maybe find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can drop me an email from my website, connect with me on LinkedIn. And to add, I will add all of those resources, including those books. Now you've asked me, I'll include the links to the books for John and Lizette's books, and a couple of others on there that I think of after, into that resources list. And you'll have some further reading on there. You'll also have all these articles that are in the slides that you can go away and read in your own time.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much for this session, and I
Thank
will
you.
talk to you soon again.
Thank you. Take care.